Hello, and welcome to the Scope of Things podcast, a no-nonsense look at the promise and problems of clinical research based on a sweep of the latest news and emerging trends in the field, and what I think is worthy of your 30 or so minutes of time. I'm Deborah Borfitz, Senior Science Writer for Clinical Research News, which means I spend a lot of time with my ear to the ground on your behalf, and a lot of hours every week speaking to top experts from around the world. Please consider making this your trusted go-to channel for staying current on things that matter, whether they give us hope or cause for pause. In another 10 minutes or so, I'll be speaking with Yvonne Rodriguez, CEO of Egality Sciences, about its work to uplift communities underserved by clinical research and questions raised by recent updates to race and ethnicity standards by the Office of Management and Budget. But first, the latest news, including an AI model for comparing drug effectiveness, adoption of minimal residual disease as an endpoint for multiple myeloma, window of opportunity trials underway in Canada, the use of HIV drugs to treat Alzheimer's, a device that could revolutionize treatment of drug-resistant depression, and a new explanation for lower levels of participation in Alzheimer's studies by African Americans and Hispanics. Scientists at Ohio State University have designed an AI model for comparing drug effectiveness without a clinical trial. In a recently published paper, which I'll link to in the show notes, the model was used to emulate randomized clinical trials to determine the most effective treatment options for stroke prevention in people with heart disease. The model was pre-trained on de-identified claims data on millions of patients and then fine-tuned with information concerning stroke risk to estimate the causal effects of different therapies and determine which would work best based on individual patient characteristics. It managed to outperform 7 existing models and come up with the same treatment recommendations as 4 randomized clinical trials. The idea here is not to replace trials, but to help save time and money by putting studies on a faster track and support the personalization of patient care, and perhaps one day be an FDA-approved decision support tool physicians could use to access an actual patient's digital twin. The proposed framework has been dubbed CURE, which stands for Causal Treatment Effect Estimation, and could be applicable to a multitude of diseases and drugs. The Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration voted unanimously in favor of evaluating new treatments for multiple myeloma by measuring minimal residual disease as an endpoint under the accelerated approval pathway, enabling patients to gain quicker access to new therapies and greatly speed up the development of new drugs for the second most common type of blood cancer. The accepted endpoint has been overall response rate based on a 50% or better reduction in disease. But with so many patients meeting that bar, demonstrating that a new drug is superior to existing therapies in clinical trials has become increasingly difficult. Doing so takes too long to be of any potential clinical value to patients with residual disease who inevitably suffer from relapse and refractoriness. Since techniques that measure minimal residual disease provide such a sensitive readout of disease, clinical trials for multiple myeloma now routinely employ such tests, and doctors also use the measurement to guide their treatment decisions. The recommendation of the advisory committee was based on an evidence meta-analysis looking at the link between minimal residual disease and clinical outcomes. In the show notes, you can find a link to all the supportive data published by the FDA on that topic. Since 2020, the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research has been supporting so-called window of opportunity clinical trials, I love that name, to take advantage of the 2 to 8 week period between the diagnosis of cancer and the surgery to remove it when no treatment is happening. The network capitalizes on that time window to study the biological effect of new cancer treatments without delaying or altering a patient's primary treatment strategy. The newest round of trials will focus on liver cancer and head and neck cancers to better understand how immunotherapies work alongside other treatments, and will also look for biomarkers that could indicate which patients would benefit most from different treatments. Preliminary data from 3 ongoing window of opportunity trials, 2 for breast cancer and 1 for bladder cancer, shows increased immune cell infiltration into the tumors following treatment. The findings, once validated in larger neoadjuvant studies, would support use of novel biomarkers to select patients for the correct treatment. The aim of the network is to interrogate the effects of various agents across one cancer type, but also have a pan-cancer approach to study a whole portfolio of multiple cancer types at the same time, to look for common therapeutic or immune responses to a specific agent or group of agents. I'll provide, again, a link to the list of currently funded trials in the show notes. Scientists at Sanford Burnham Prebys have uncovered promising real-world links between common HIV drugs and a reduced incidence of Alzheimer's disease. In a recently published study, they showed how the Alzheimer's-associated gene APP is recombined by using the same type of enzyme called reverse transcriptase, or RT, found in HIV. Many viruses rely on RT to hijack a host cells to establish a chronic infection, and the brain appears to have its own version of the enzyme. An analysis of medical records from more than 225,000 patients show that RT inhibitor exposure was associated with a statistically significant reduced incidence and prevalence of Alzheimer's disease. Also, relative to the general population, fewer than expected HIV-positive individuals taking RT inhibitors and other combined antiretroviral therapies developed Alzheimer's as they aged. The next step is to identify which versions of RTs are at work in the Alzheimer's brain so that more targeted treatments can be discovered. In the meantime, the researchers say prospective clinical trials of currently available RT inhibitors on persons with early Alzheimer's should be pursued. A link to study findings, again, in the show notes. Engineers at Rice University have created a tiny, wirelessly powered implant designed to stimulate the brain that could be ready for testing in human subjects in just a couple of years. The blueberry-sized device, known as a digitally programmable overbrain therapeutic, or DOT, attaches to the bottom of the skull and could revolutionize treatment for drug-resistant depression and other psychiatric or neurological disorders. It would be an alternative to current neural stimulation-based therapies and more invasive brain-computer interfaces. In a newly published study, the device was tested temporarily in a human patient and activated the motor cortex, resulting in the patient moving their hand. The technology relies on a material that converts magnetic fields into electrical pulses and is imagined as a home-use device prescribed by physicians after implantation via a minimally invasive 30-minute procedure. Motif Neurotech, a startup formed through a Rice Translation Initiative, is in ongoing discussions with the FDA about planned clinical trials in humans that would initially include an open-label study in a handful of patients, followed by randomized trials where the control would involve use of a sham device and delayed start of the actual therapy by 2 or 3 weeks. In the show notes, I'll link to the study as well as the company website where patients and caregivers can sign up to learn when and where these trials will begin and the input patients are having on design of the study and usability of the DOT product. I've also written a full story on the topic that you can find on clinicalresearchnewsonline.com. The underrepresentation of African Americans and Hispanics in Alzheimer's disease clinical trials has a new explanation: lower levels of amyloid protein in their blood at early stages of the disease. Researchers from the Keck School of Medicine of the University of South Carolina made the discovery after comparing amyloid readings from both blood tests and brain scans on nearly 5,000 participants. Based on the blood test, people who identified as non-Hispanic whites were most likely to meet eligibility cutoffs for clinical trials than those who identified as Hispanic Black, Hispanic White, non-Hispanic Asian, and non-Hispanic Black, although all plasma-eligible individuals were equally likely to be eligible to participate based on PET scan data. The suggestion here is that the cutoffs for eligibility are adequate, but paradoxically, some groups have a higher risk of dementia but lower levels of amyloid, so treating those groups may require a different approach. The need for better access to community-based Alzheimer's disease pre-screening and screening opportunities in the U.S. was also highlighted. And finally, the U.S. Office of Management and Budget recently updated its standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting race ethnicity data across federal agencies, and it has raised a lot of questions about the potential impact on the diversity-related data collection requirements in clinical trials. Among the biggest changes are a directive to use a combined race ethnicity question so that a single response such as Hispanic or Latino would suffice. A new minimum reporting category has been added for Middle Eastern and North African, folks who heretofore had been captured in the white racial category. There is also a requirement to collect detailed race ethnicity responses beyond the minimum categories for most situations. But the Afro-Hispanic community has yet to be acknowledged, as today's guest will speak to in just a few moments. I'll link to the OMB's final recommendations in the show notes. It is now time for a Q&A with today's guest, Egality Sciences' Yvonne Rodriguez, who specializes in breaking down barriers to clinical research participation in underserved communities by teaching physicians and staff at local hospitals and health centers how to get and stay involved with industry-sponsored studies. Welcome to the show, Yvonne.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, before I dive into a few of the burning questions I have for you, Yvonne, why don't you start us off with your elevator pitch? At Egality Sciences, exactly what do you do and do uniquely that has grabbed the attention of industry sponsors?
Absolutely. Egality Sciences is a clinical research investigator support enterprise. So we're a RISE, and we give all underengaged and underrepresented communities the ability to participate in research by providing education, operational tools, and support that yield a more inclusive and diverse clinical trial landscape. We're very different because we don't fit into the typical research model. We work together to build a more holistic environment where communities and clinical research can succeed together. What this means is that, yes, we help communities build and prepare sites for clinical research, but we also help the community leaders bring clinical trial education through community health care workers. We'll bring community physicians that are traditionally underrepresented. And then we also have a group of international medical graduates that can come to these communities and become thought leaders in this research space. Our mission is to build, sites in these communities, but we want the whole of our community and the clinical research community to be served. I started my company because I was actually leading oncology trials in the industry, and my younger brother was diagnosed with cancer.
Sorry.
It's life, but he also had several other limitations. He's from Texas. He didn't have any medical insurance. And I thought that a clinical trial would be best for him. But not only did we find that there were no clinical trials in our city, but the academic center that was closest to us only took employer-based insurance. So this kind of left a huge gap. I feel like that, he could have participated in a trial. He was willing to do that, but there wasn't anything for him. So this is kind of what was the catalyst for me to start Egality.
Yeah, and I don't know if that early experience has sort of replicated itself over time or not. I mean, what have you found to be the chief holdups in getting physicians in underserved communities like that engaged as investigators in industry-sponsored trials? What exactly are you doing and finding you need to deal with?
Yeah, so some of those holdups are basically those trust issues that, and basically some of the older physicians weren't trained in clinical trials. So when they think about trials, or when I approach them about trials, they think that I'm talking about bench science. So I have to tell them that, the industry, obviously we work in clinical trials, and that's how we work towards medicine's development. There's also, when I approach other types of community-based organizations like federally qualified health centers, they have unfounded fears of, losing federal funding because they're taking part in research, in industry research. And so I've had to I'm actually working with the Department of Health and Human Services to try to address this, from the bottom, from the top up, just down, because I'm trying to get something in writing that will help alleviate that fear. I also, I think everyone can agree with me in the industry, but the complexity of study protocols themselves, some of these trials, look at things, they want to look at certain data endpoints. And so they end up creating a very complex protocol that doesn't really match what happens in real life. Mm-hmm. So I think that some of the potential clinical principal investigators, they're kind of turned off by the complexity, and then they just don't want to pursue it.
I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think that some of the last but not least, I think from having my experience with pharma and working in industry, I think that there is a disconnect between what industry feels that communities have and what they actually, have to live with. For example, I've had to talk to some very affluent leaders, and they, they don't have the ability to understand that even basic Wi-Fi it can be an issue. I know I can speak to the fact that older Latinos that are on limited income, are provided a flip phone, but it's not a smartphone. So, if you give out QR codes, if you think that you have a smartphone that can capture surveys, that's not always the case.
Yeah, and that issue goes far beyond the elderly Latino
Yeah,
community. I have people in my family who just don't like anything other than what they're used to. So,
exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
so you can't make assumptions for sure. That's a good point. I believe you told me that the clinical trial training provided by Egality Sciences is accredited, if I'm not mistaken, in a couple of states, so physicians and staff can get continuing education credits. Can you talk about, I mean, how many healthcare workers have you trained, and what's unique about your curriculum? And is it aimed at certain races and ethnicities, or does it focus broadly on cultural competencies as well as the rigors, of course, of conducting GCP compliant research?
Yes. So thank you so much for that question, because I'm very proud of what we've created. So we actually provided an introduction to clinical research that was meant for community healthcare workers. This was actually in collaboration. The initial training was in collaboration with the Medical Center of the Americas, based in El Paso, Texas, and it serves the New Mexico, West Texas, and some parts of Mexico. So what we've done there is we've been able to help train roughly about 100 community healthcare workers, and we hope to be able to continue the training throughout the country. It is certified in the state of Texas, and of course, we're trying to get the same certification so that community healthcare workers can, sit in it and be able to learn, but also put it to, their professional goals to meet these continuing education units. The aim was to be honest, the aim was for community healthcare workers, but anyone can sit in on the training. This in particular, this training was 100% in Spanish.
Wow.
It's a general lay-term introduction to clinical research. It's unique because it's not just in lay terms and it's in Spanish, but the meaningfulness behind it is to interact and to get anyone on the course to appreciate the participation of research and see the importance of participating. What we do, and I think a lot of the CHWs or the community healthcare workers really, really enjoyed just, taking a box of medication, opening it up and pulling out that package insert and having them open it and tell them that this is all research and this is all, information is at their fingertips. They just need to know where to find it. And so a lot of them were just thrilled to see that, that it goes from them participating into the medicine that they take. And they're able to see that.
I'm not sure how long ago this happened. Is there any way of saying what happened with all these trained individuals? Like, I'm not sure if it's too early to have any read on that, but I'm just curious. Did they go on and do a lot of studies, or is that underway?
That is underway. So I believe that the Medical Center of the Americas does have ambassadors. And so these ambassadors basically are able to field questions that the community may have. They're also able to basically guide potential patients or participants to centers that may have trials that are meant for them.
Mm-hmm.
They are also trained on the importance of it being 100% voluntary, and the fact that, they're there to guide. Obviously, they're not there to make decisions on inclusion, exclusion, and that this has to be clear to the community member that, while they may want to take part, they also may not qualify, and the reasons why.
Good stuff. And I wanted to get to, this term, the medical deserts, another term I like. Are there quite a few of these medical deserts out there? I think that's your term, that are scattered around the country. And under the best of circumstances, how fast can you move from one community to the next, building a stable of capable clinical research investigators and kind of opening the floodgates to equitable research participation? Is that even realistic?
Yeah, so I wanted to say that there was a publication back in 2021 that basically cited almost 80% of the country lacks adequate access to healthcare. So it's going to take a few egalities or people, just collectively to get a movement going to help, all communities. We're definitely committed to those that we've approached and that have raised their hands when we first presented opportunities in clinical research. I think it's going to take thinking outside the box, in addition to what's already happening, like the decentralization of healthcare with
Right.
telemedicine and, by decentralization of clinical trials in general, so that we can reach more people faster.
Yeah.
For us, I think that it's not just the training and the infrastructure, but to make it a reality, I think it's the sustainability. It's helping support when support is needed, resources, funding, staff, things of that nature.
Yeah. The usual suspects.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, to be clear, are we talking about trials of every stripe here, or is there a greater or lesser need to create a clinical research enterprise in underserved regions for certain diseases or types of trial designs, or simply to meet the diversity mandates of regulators?
Yeah, so the main indication that I've seen has always been oncology. It's also followed by the central nervous system. But basically, that was the majority of the trials. I see champions in this space that are trying to push for accessibility in areas that there previously hasn't been. And I wouldn't say necessarily that people are just trying to check off a box, but I do understand the business of it. And I know that generally speaking, businesses tend to think that when money's invested, that there should be an immediate return on investment. I see champions, myself included, having to build a business case on why proper representation is necessary. And meaning, like, if I invest this, how many dollars am I going to get in return? But I think that there has to be a reality check here. The same communities that that we're trying to approach they've repeatedly been taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So we have to remind industry leaders about this.
Good
It's going to take
point.
time.
Yeah. Always. Okay. But before we go, Yvonne, I need to ask you about the OMB's updated race ethnicity standards, including the 3 big changes I reported during the news section and the fact that Afro-Hispanics don't even get a mention. The exercise of accurately capturing population data in this way seems to grow ever the more complex and confusing. What do these updates mean for study sponsors under a diversity mandate? And what's sort of the hubbub on the street about all this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just, as you mentioned earlier during the announcement of the news, they basically, OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget, published this statistical policy directive, right? And what they were trying to do is that they were trying to update these changes to reduce reporting some other race. And they were able to find, just narrow it down. But I think in doing so, they inserted Latino as a category, and then to commiserate with Black, but not also, it positions Black as foreign to Latino identity. And it encourages the view of a Black category as only pertaining to non-Latinos in ways that can be viewed by erasing the existence of actually Afro-Latinos. So, they're trying to reduce the reporting of some other race, but then it's discouraging for 12% of the Latino community that identifies as Afro-Latino. So I think we have, we have some way to go. I appreciate that they've made some really good updates to this publication, but I feel like all the voices have to be brought to the table to build a better understanding. When you say I think this change can basically be adapted very easily by industry. I think we can try to champion and to ask industry to be a little bit proactive, because there's like I mentioned, 6 million Afro-Latinos in the US at this point in time. So maybe it can be an easy electronic data capture point, an additional one, so that we can be proactive and make the change.
Well, you make it sound easier than I thought it would be.
I know.
At the end of the day, we are indeed all individuals who differ in terms of our needs and constraints, which goes beyond race and ethnicity, even if we could or they could be perfectly defined, which of course they have yet to be.
Right.
Keep up the good fight, Yvonne, to even the playing field so that clinical research is available to more people across the great U.S. melting pot. And thanks again for being on today's show.
Thank you for having me.
You are certainly welcome. Let's stay in touch. As always, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening in. If you're not subscribed to this podcast yet, please consider going to Apple Podcasts and doing so right now so you don't miss your monthly dose of news and perspectives you'll be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. And if you're up for it, I'd also be very grateful if you'd leave a rating and review while you're there. For more straight talk on studies involving humans, visit clinicalresearchnewsonline.com. And if you're a clinical research professional, we hope also to see you at our next SCOPE conference where we make things happen. Bye for now.